All right. Hello there.
Hi,
Good
Jeff.
morning to Kate in New Zealand and Angus in Sweden this evening. Good evening to you. It's a bright sunny afternoon here in Saxbahaw, North Carolina.
So here as well. Oh no, you can't see. It's blue skies here as well.
It's dark out there. So first, what I want to do is just introduce what we're doing, and we're trying something new, which is to take a significant, say, a significant look at people's efforts to figure stuff out. Basically in the same sense that we are through this process of examining the spiritual nature of life and the epistemological nature of the way in which we approach that life, and the ways in which Rudolf Steiner particularly unfolds a complex ontological framework through which we can explore. And so these guys are three psychologists. John Vervaeke is a cognitive scientist, a cognitive psychologist at the University of Toronto. Zak is a Harvard-trained educationalist and human development person who's working on existential risk with Daniel Schmachtenberger and the Consilience Project. And Gregg Henriques is a clinical psychologist who also publishes and works within academia, I take it. And they're taking an earnest look at transformation as real, the efforts to build a metapsychology. And it's my contention, basically, that what they're talking about is anthroposophy, and that it's already there to some extent. But I think it's really important that that anthroposophy is in conversation, in dialogue with people who are knocking at the door of the complex dynamical system that Rudolf Steiner has researched and given us a good head start on these questions. And I'm finding more and more public intellectuals coming closer and closer to Steiner's worldview, while being somewhat allergic to Steiner's worldview because of what he's discovered there, and because what he's discovered there is rather fantastic. It's rather fantastical seeming. But there's nothing. What does Shakespeare say about heaven and earth?
There's more philosophy or something like that.
There's more lawyers. Sorry. Anyway, the mysteries are there, and what I love about anthroposophy is that we start with the mystery. We don't start with certainty, and it's having our backs up against to that the mystery that we make progress in a certain way, and it sort of encloaks us as we further and further incarnate into the truth, goodness, and beauty of reality. And so these guys are making an earnest effort. And so I would like to just get you two to describe what it is that you would like to get out of this, what our objective is from your point of view. And just with a brief introduction of who you are. And I'm a cook. I own a small business. Yeah.
You go first, Kate.
Oh dear. Okay.
Yes, dear.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm a student and I'm a gardener. I am also a lover of anthroposophy. And the reason I want to do this is because it can be really exciting to listen to really smart people use language that I don't understand, and then there comes a tipping point where you go, oh, they're using words that I do understand. I just see it in a different way, which I mean probably means I have a different ontology or a slightly different language to describe reality because I embrace anthroposophy. And what I want to get out of it is to probably be able to communicate that bridge to other people. I want that bridge to be stronger and not just existing as something golden and vibrating in my mind, but something that is real that I can use to speak to people that I respect, so that we aren't kept, that the fantastical isn't a barrier, that we can meet people at this where they want to be met with, and then invite them into anthroposophy. Or I don't even know, it sounds weird to say it that way, but I just believe that anthroposophy describes reality in a really satisfying way, and people are trying to find ways to describe reality at the moment because we have a meaning crisis. And so I would like to be able to, in my life, offer anthroposophy as an antidote to the meaning crisis. Yeah.
Beautiful. Angus?
Yeah, Angus Hawkins, live in Sweden. Currently working as a Spanish teacher. Been involved in anthroposophy, or anthroposophical reading, not so much in anthroposophical circles, for 30 plus years. And it's predominantly Jeff's energy that's brought me here. I knew nothing about Zak, or I knew the name Vervaeke before, and Gregg is a completely new name to me. But it's Jeff's energy to making anthroposophical concepts. It's not that it's anthroposophy. It's useful, helpful concepts for making greater sense of life, and making them more accessible to people. I think most people will recognize that Steiner is very difficult to penetrate. The three of us have spent a lot of time dedicating ourselves to penetrating some of that, the vast body of work that he created. And one of the joyous things is that when we listen to these experts, I mean, these are experts in their fields, we feel not only we understand them, even if they're using different words from us, as Kate was saying, but that also where they run into brick walls in their thinking, we don't. We're not saying this is easy. We're certainly not saying this is easy, but they're running it. When I listen to the first video that we're talking about today, I hear them running into walls, and I don't experience the same the same walls. And I know that is because of the conceptual frameworks that I bring with me from Steiner's spiritual science, but also repeating a little bit what Kate was saying there. There's a great joy in talking with or engaging with people that really do have a high level of competence in a field in which you don't. That's how we learn, by talking to people that are actually smarter than us in certain fields, and getting ourselves up to speed on what are their essential questions, and then seeing if, perhaps we really do have something to offer here. It's like in the form of concepts from anthroposophy that broaden the conversation, start indicating solutions that for a lot of people don't even seem to exist.
Excellent. Those two descriptions completely converge, as Vervaeke would say, with my own point of view here, and I'm inspired by the way you've described it, because we have three different perspectives ourselves, and these gentlemen have three different perspectives, and they do an amazing job of being respectful and really following the principles of a dialogic conversation. And I think we've been achieving that as well. I do feel a little bit like when I'm engaging with Zak's work, and Zak's mentioned that he will join us sometime, perhaps later this month. But when I'm engaging with his work as a musician, say, or an artist in concepts, I feel like I'm playing with Miles Davis, and I'm a pop musician, But that is just because of the language difference. And so I want to start with just a brief description of what they mean by transformation. So, because I'm not sure that they're particularly clear on this, this idea because transformation and development are not synonymous, and they often use the terms synonymously, and they're definitely not synonymous. Transformation happens in all forms of nature. Transformation happens as a given, as a reality, but development is something that has to be cultivated, whether it's with children or with one's self as an adult. And we'll come back to this child development, adult development differentiation later too. But yes, I think it's important not to at this moment have the definitive statement of what transformation is versus development. But I think just maybe a brief look at that. Do you guys have any thoughts about this term that they're using, transformation?
Yeah, I had a reflection on that. It was about 40 minutes into the video where I really became interested in this transformation, because it's so essential to us, to human life, to every single individual. They have to be interested in this question of, how am I changing? How am I going to change in my life? And I think once I was able to map their transformation onto, let's say it's the biographical process or biography work from Anthroposophical, it's like, okay, right. now I know why you're really interested in this, guys, because I'm really interested in it as well. But it took a while to wake up to that. They were saying lots of interesting things before that, but they hadn't captured my attention until it's like gelled in me. Okay, yeah, we are on the same. We are talking about heartfelt issues here.
Yeah. Anything to add, Kate?
Yeah, I didn't really understand what they meant by transformation, and I didn't even try to at first. Didn't really think about, because it's such a common word that it didn't fire a what does that mean signal in my head. But I realized that the problem with transformation seems to be that how can we be self-transcending and self-creating? It seems like for Vervaeke, and maybe all of them, that is a paradox. For me, that is not a paradox, because I have concepts of ultra personal and self that is eternal, that can come in at a transcendent level. I also have always been allergic to the word transcendent, and I feel like it means something different from the image that it makes in our head. I don't think of it as, trying to escape this physical world. I think real transcendence happens not in losing yourself, like losing your cares or something, but actually developing your cares and developing your attention and working. Like real transcendence is being involved in life instead of watching it from afar, which is kind of the opposite of what you think. Do you know what I mean? Transcendence sort of has the idea that you're kind of watching yourself from afar, but I think that's where we always are, and that what we want is to develop coming into ourselves. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, Angus. Thank you, Kate. That's great.
Kate picked up on the other thing that I had thought about. It was particularly the word transform. It's a Latinate, and it has this very materialistic feel about it. It's like getting a lump of plasticine that's a certain shape and re-squidging it until it turns into another stage. I think if they'd have been talking about growth, something dynamic, I would think I would have been in the conversation a lot quicker. But perhaps it's the word transformation that it took me a while to realize that it had real life for them as well.
Well, a bit later they talk about scaffolding instead of levels, and how it's always a dynamic process. And
and that we're, as Zach says, we're in it. We're not removed from it. And and they definitely agree about that from at least an intellectual standpoint. So yeah, I think that's helpful. It's similar to the word. I didn't have so much trouble with the word transformation, except that it's kind of a new agey word in my book. But when you broaden it out to mean everything that is going through stage changes, like Zach mentions the butterfly and the imago, and the way in which it then becomes. The caterpillar then becomes a butterfly, and it's not even the same organism. There's no genetic sharing of information, so-called information. It's just gone, and then this new thing arises. And I think that is not an perfectly apt comparison to what Kate was saying and what you were saying, but that because we become more of ourselves when we transcend this moment. That's kind of the idea. More of ourselves, more of the more intimate relationship with reality. And it's clear coming out of Philosophy of Freedom this time for me that Steiner's idea of spiritual worlds, as complex as they are, and as isomorphic and purely spiritual, say, as they are, that they are part of this world. Those realms are part of this world. They're not part of a transcendent world. But it's similar, this word transformation. I had a problem with the word normative throughout this, and so I look forward to looking at that as we go forward when they start to use it, but maybe in real time. So I think we can. Let me introduce Zach's. Anybody else have anything to say there on transformation and such? Okay.
I do want to still talk about our experiences with it, but I don't think we should talk about it now.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I agree completely. Yeah.
Cool.
So this is going to be a clip where Zach, I picked Zach most of the time, or even every time for myself, because he has a way of summing it up and then adding dimensions to the conversation every single time he speaks. That's what happens. So he has a sort of meta dialogic ability that I think is amazing, because he can do that in a conversation, but he can also talk to many different kinds of people with many different approaches to life. And I've always been very impressed by Zach in that way, and his humility and rigor. The two of those things together. John as well. I don't know Greg quite as well, but so here Zach does the sort of sums up the scope of their objective, not necessarily their objective, but what it is that the rather than just psychological, he gives us a picture that I think has a scope that is everything but pre-incarnative, say, something like that. So let's roll.
Okay.
And so this question of transformation or development is actually central to the way I think about the psyche. Just that it's been my main problem with existing psychological models, is that they tend to be static or horizontal, and not talking about the fact that at one point that was just a single cell in the mother's womb, and the entire nervous system unfolded, and then over a course of epigenetic growth. So I've been very fascinated by these topics. And of course, they're widely misunderstood. I worked for a decade doing psychometrics in the field of cognitive development. So looking very specifically at micro-developmental patterns with very precise measurements. So I'm like, this is very core to it. And then as an educator more broadly, I started to understand that process of individual transformation as nested in a broader socio-cultural process of transformation, essentially, which would be something like cultural evolution or cultural transformation, and education being a critical catalyst in whether a society transforms or whether a society actually doesn't transform. And
that was where you wanted me to pause, wasn't it, Jeff?
Yes. So what I hear there is him capturing the idea that you can't talk about transformation in any sense of the word, including developmental, if we don't have a scope that includes what embryology, right? And I think of Dennis Klosek here and his work with embryology and in relationship to, say, the creation story, or also psychological and spiritual sort of innateness, right? And so he lets in the door embryology, and then he then talks about of course, individual stage development of Piaget. He mentions who is a child development expert. I would say not to the multidimensional, not in the multidimensional way that Rudolf Steiner is. But then he talks about the environment and the reality, and I think here of Aristotle's conformity theory, and I'm very keen to develop that in my own life as relates to his also Aristotle's 10 concepts, because it's the way in which we position ourselves in relationship to the reality around us. Is we're not isolated monads going through the world, just going through transformational development, and so that was I thought it was a good start for the scope of the conversation that they're going after.
Yes, I have really enjoyed listening to Zak's work or Zak's conversations, because he has that same desire to say these theories need to be applied to the physical life, not just my mental life. The whole world needs to be uniform in the way it unfolds, in different ways, but there are patterns that are in reality, in physical reality, and the way that atoms are ordered to the way my thoughts are ordered. I've always said there needs to be, if we don't have a system of concepts that I can't extrapolate to explain the way my face is laid out, I'm not interested. Because it's abstract. And I think this comes because when you said Piaget is an expert, I would say he is. And an expert is someone who has one field that they learn about. But I wouldn't say Rudolf Steiner is an expert in anything. I would say that he uses the method of spiritual science to gain insight into many things. And that insight, because spiritual science is based in reality, he's able to pierce reality of lots of different things. He doesn't need to be an expert of anything. That's how I find Steiner. It's interesting when you look him up and and his little tag is Rudolf Steiner, Austrian architect, and you go, I wouldn't even you can't argue any other label to give him, because it's just someone who brought something into the world. Not really. He didn't. Yeah, I wouldn't give him a professional label.
Yeah,
or an expert label.
As Gregg says, he spiritual science and anthroposophy that he and the research that he brought, but also the method in which he brought it, creates affordances, as Gregg would say over and over again in this video. This gives an affordance for that, and this gives an affordance for that, and right. The body of work affords us the faith in the ontology that Zak mentions later. Yeah, that we have the tools innate within us as beings with potential wisdom. Yeah.
I'll add in. I think it's extremely healthy that Zak Wood is bringing into real growth, real transformation. It's straight in at the get go. It's not some theory. This is if we look at the human being, if we look how the natural world recapitulates stages. I mean, this is the work of Haeckel, isn't it? It's like every human being in the it's like when it goes to the embryology stages, recapitulating and belong. So embryology, and then it's like the transformation of the fetus. It recapitulates every stage, all the animal stages before it becomes a human being. And this is highly significant. And they might think it's not significant, but coming from our perspective, we understand how hugely significant it is, because this is genuine transformation, setting up a body in this case, which then becomes capable of further transformation. So I really do like. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Zak contributes to this conversation from that perspective, because he has a view on growth transformation that is far more in line with what I perceive Gregg and John's to be. But I've only watched one video, so I could be misspeaking there.
Yeah. Well, so if it's okay, I'll move on to just an introduction to John's problematization.
That's the one.
Thank you. I've been walking around saying that word all day, the last several days, and suddenly I couldn't say it. Problematization of transformation itself, which I think is a really good move. Like the idea that they're going to start almost with a devil's advocate, and the power of the argument is of course persuasive. Maybe I'm a little impressionable, but one thing John says is it is the dominant narrative, and that is Fodor's computational, the idea that the mind is a computational device. Essentially, it's an information processing device, and he gives the logic that and we'll come back to this word logic, because the assumptions are that everything the mind does is logical, and so it's not possible for the mind to develop because it can't go from a lower form of logic into inferring its way into a higher form of logic, which does two things. One, it prejudices logic as the mind. The other thing it does is it prejudices the notion that inference is the only way we can have knowledge, and we know better than that from philosophy of freedom. That inference is not a way to have knowledge. It could be useful as a technique, but it does not give you the reality of, say, how a proto-amniote turns into a reptile, right? So he does this, and he does it in a very sort of convincing way, because as both he and Gregg admitted, they are transformed materialists in this sense, that they both started their careers with the idea that is, and I would say Gregg holds on to this even stronger than John does to some extent, as he calls himself a naturalist, and I think that'll come out in the conversation as well. But that they're striving is seen here in the way that then John essentially illustrates to us how he got out of that, how he was able to it didn't feel right, it wasn't operationally relevant to him, yet it is the predominant way in science. And so I picked Zak here to sum it up again, because he provides us the proper framework for why that is. It's not native to psychology. It's a problem of and I would say Zak doesn't even get to the fullest part here, but let's look at that, and then I would like us to have some dialogue around that.
Okay.
Try to take a break after. Oh, first, take a break there. Is that okay as an analogy to help people get a sense of what we're concerned with and what we're talking about? Sort of the distinction between Locke and Piaget and quantitative and qualitative development.
I think it's a wonderful place to start. And you're right about Locke and Piaget, absolutely. It's worth noting that the Lockean blank slate is such that it's not just quantitative, but it's also just like passive, just like literally pumping it in. Whereas the Piagetian qualitatively developmental thing is active.
Yes,
and metabolizing the environment.
Yep.
And so it's the environment organism interaction that yields development in this very complex way. And then, your analogy is great. I would say also it's like you can learn vocabulary in English, and then you can learn the rules of grammar in English, which are still they're still about English. but they are now
Yes,
explicit.
that's good too.
So that's an actual developmental sequence.
Yep.
Before you teach a kid grammar, he's just got to have a bunch of words and use language. And so he's learned English, but he can be qualitatively more advanced in his capacity with English with a totally new kind of knowledge, kinds of words, parts of speech, things of that nature.
Excellent.
So that's an example on the same vector. But you're right about, that you need English to learn graphing. So you use English to make this whole qualitatively new leap into, representations, quantitative representations, which are extremely abstract. So that's a wonderful segue in. It's very important.
Amen. I'll just add a quick point just in relationship to when we're thinking the whole person. Of course, there's the cognitive capacities in relationship to think. And then, of course, there's also the whole motivation, emotional elements. Those of you that remember puberty may remember a transition that wasn't just a function of learning, but all of a sudden something happens in relationship to both the body, the emotions, the drives, and that we all have. So there's that whole multi-layered, if we're talking about the human psychology, of course, which I know, but I just figured so that folks can have that in mind.
Thank you. That's excellent to point out. We want transformation.
Thinking, feeling, and willing. Yeah, we want transformation as a prayer. Thinking, feeling, and willing. There, I heard Greg say. I thought that was nice. That it was good that he did that, because what are we operating on, right, with children, and how best to do it? So setting that, explaining that clip just from a viewer's point of view, that Fodor and as represented by Lockean logic, is that everything is the child is a blank slate. They're passive, and then it's just a matter of the speed at which we can fill them with information, and that's the way they become adults. So if you could fill them with all the information that is necessary by the age 5, then they're an adult, right? And this is, of course, absurd to say, but it is the result of that kind of thinking, and it tells you why there's a paradigm problem in our society at large, say. And then we talked about the complex. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It occurred to me that even though I'm sure a lot of people say, well, the Lockean way to think about it is absurd, because we are hesitant to embrace something that looks a bit more like Piagetian. What do I mean? We just by default come back to Lockean way of thinking about it, even if we don't truly embrace. Like, I don't think anyone would say that it's possible to cause a 5-year-old to be an adult because you gave them enough information about what life is. But the hesitancy to embrace anything else, you fall back on that kind of purely logical level. And I was thinking, this is what I actually wanted to say. That jump in learning words and then learning grammar, it's always kicked off by that intuitive moment. It's not in the percepts, and that's why you can't get that from inference. You get an intuitive moment, and then suddenly you read differently. And in English, it's really easy to use that analogy because it's actually what's happening. I was taught what a speech mark was, and then suddenly you see books and that's what that, and it's, why did I never see that before, sort of thing. But it's not just because you're taught it, it's because you make the intuitive connection from the percept and the concept, which is a key in transformation and learning, I think. It's always that link of the two sides. I think that solves the problem for me personally.
And I think this is what you're saying there, Kate, is something that we're going to come back to time and time and time and time again, because it's actually only once we gain conceptual clarity on a problem that we're actually able to recognize actually the solutions or ideas that perhaps already exist out there that could map a way forward. for this transformation. And obviously, the three of us, we've got ideas that we bring with us from anthroposophy. But I would even argue that psychology itself, if it was, I wonder if there's sort of like too much silo thinking going on here, because I mean, first of all, Piaget isn't the only developmental psychologist, okay? And developmental psychology has come such a long way, sort of into like showing how obvious it is that new functions are sort of like something. It's a natural part of growth. I remember when I looked at this in details when I was doing my teacher training a long time ago. I was deeply fascinated by this fact that I think it was, I'm going to make this number up because I can't remember it, it was so long ago, but if kittens don't see horizontal lines between the 8th and the 10th week, they'll never see horizontal lines, and they'll keep bumping into things that are horizontal. And this has been sort of like fleshed out in such detail with animals, and also with human beings, because we've been living with human beings for so long. But the fact that these real new function, the clarity about these new functions hasn't like filtered through into psychology and this key word of transformation. It surprises me, but on the other hand, it doesn't surprise me because perhaps it's the silo thinking, perhaps it's certain academic pressures to always be able to refer to as like strict scientific protocols in research, and only certain types of quantifiable research is accepted. In fact, I already feel that I know that a lot of qualitative research is done there, so I think I've already overstepped what I wanted to say. What I want to say is there's a lot of evidence out there already that just by growing up, that in itself is sort of that transformation gives us new capabilities as human beings, and that is also true for animal kingdom.
Yeah, Zach does a really, I think, a really nice job in following this, where he talks about that these things that we see later on as developmental stages are already there, and they've already come online. He says, and that their recapitulation of the inherent wisdom that's already there. Say the only thing missing from his picture of this, of course, from our point of view, is that you can't talk about that single-celled organism in the mother's womb without talking about where that single-celled organism came from. And I'm not talking about the birds and the bees. I'm talking about the individual being that chose those parents and is incarnating in those parents.
Yeah.
So, anything else on this little snippet here?
No, not for me.
I think we're coming to decision time. Do you, Ben?
Yeah. So this is John. He talks a lot about a researcher called L.A. Paul and the decision-making process. And I was linking this to, there was quite a bit of talk off the back of this. Actually, we'll watch the video and then I'll talk about what I think some of the interesting things that come up in this video are. Yeah, let's do it from there.
And I'll use my terms, and I have mapped them onto Laurie's terms in front of her, and she was happy with that. And one is, I think, very good. So she says, first of all, you're perspectively ignorant. You don't know what it's like to be a vampire, in the way that Thomas Nagel is. You don't know what it's like to be a bat. You don't know what that will be like, what that salient landscaping, what your state of consciousness. You don't know. You don't know. The only way to have that is to be a vampire, and you are not yet a vampire, so you're ignorant of that. You also have participatory ignorance. Your identity, your structure of preferences, and the things you identify within yourself and disidentify are going to change. So you don't know who you're going to be. You don't know, right? So you don't know, yourself is going to change. So the values you have now and the identity you have now are not the values and the identity you're going to have there. So you can't judge. And then you will, when she says, well, then you'll say, I just won't do it. But she said, there's a problem here because there's an exact symmetry of ignorance. If you don't do it, you don't know what you're missing. You deeply don't know what you're missing.
Okay. Why have I chosen this to focus on? I suppose I find it very intriguing. This, I mean, obviously, we need to make decisions in our life, and that they will be linked to transformative processes that will result as a part of that. But there's a lot of he starts referring to models for decision making, and one of the things that I find, I suppose, that rubs up against like my way of thinking about this is this mathematical. There should be a perfectly rationalized reason for doing one thing as opposed to the other. It's very much like a game theory of life, that there is a right decision and there is a wrong decision. And this game theorizing of life to try and create this optimal decision-making process for life, so that I can transform my life in a certain way, strikes me as very, very mechanical. And whilst I was pondering over this, I was reminded of a book that I read 30 years ago by a guy who'd been taken hostage, a guy called Brian Keenan. And he was taken hostage, and he was in solitary confinement for 2.5 years. And he describes the breakdown that he went through and how he came through the other side. And when I listen to a person like that, I actually revisited a video of his to reinform myself. I hear somebody talking about how real life experiences are part of this change process, and that this game theory predicting theory is so far away from a living free relationship to life, where I meet life and I also react with my emotions. I'm not this calculating machine, so trying to maximize my advantage in a game theory model, but my whole being is involved in that process. And the other thing that I feels very distant from an anthroposophical perspective here is the Gedanken experiment that he talks about here. There's that turn yourself into a vampire, or would you turn yourself into a vampire? I think people need real. I understand the value of doing thought experiments, but I'm unsure as to how helpful it is when somebody like L.A. Paul brings in these experiments where you can problematize turning into a vampire, which I don't think it's got much to do with people transforming their lives. I think if that person's understanding of the decision-making process were closer to the real life experiences of people, it would it would be far more convincing. And I think this will be one of the challenges, trying to find examples of people who it's like describe this, describe with real experiences this transformative process that happens as off the back of decision making. That's
Can I jump in there? So there's the second part of the thought experiment that you have to add to that, and I agree with you somewhat, but it's also a helpful thought experiment, because L.A. Paul uses the vampire analogy to, I guess, in a way, show that now this would be an irrevocable thing. One, if you're a vampire, then you never die, right? Unless somebody drives a stake through your heart, whatever the mythology of that is. You have to eat, you have to drink people's blood to live. These sorts of things, right? Like these are like irrevocable things, assuming you can't change back. But that's not really the point of it. Because she plays a trick on the person she's interviewing, because she then goes, here's the real, I'm going to put you in this frame of mind of think what it would be like if you had to decide you were deciding whether or not to be a vampire. Okay, now let's apply that to marriage and having children, or let's apply that to having children. So she does this turn that gets you into the real world, and makes the analogy that it's just as unlivable into as the vampire, the falsity of the vampire picture. And then Zak follows this by saying, yeah, no, that's not good, because we do have the ability to not know the future necessarily, but we do have the ability to know who we will be with some level of certainty, if in a future scenario where we have children. Or he uses the if I decide to join the army, I have to know that there's aspects of myself that I can trust that I will be able to fulfill my tasks in a way that is part of a biographical continuity, say, something like that. So that adds a little flavor to it. But there's also then, if we add the problem of decision making, as if it were something you made a decision about and then something happened in the future, as opposed to what Steiner talks about, decisions coming from the realm that the will impulse for decision comes from the realm of Atman, from spirit man. It's the highest spiritual body that is involved in this process. And I don't think you can talk about any of this if you don't go into a conversation about what thinking is, right? Because you have to think to make a decision. And Steiner, in Foundations of Human Experience, describes thinking as on the thinking pole of the will impulse. Thinking is a picture, a picturing, and that picturing is a process that is a leftover from the spiritual world out of which you came to incarnate from. And so it was the way in which you were negotiating with higher spiritual intelligence, is the way in which you were forming your relationship to this body that you were going to incarnate in. And then and then that's relatable to what Steiner calls the wish, the feeling of wish, the impulse of wish, which is to always do better. Like we're always we're never going to be perfectly correct about anything. That we are not only are not going to be correct, but we're not going to know everything, and there's no way to know everything all at once. But the spirit self, which is an independent entity that is a tendency in the human frame at this point, at some time it will be deeply incarnated into us, but right now it's still just a tendency, and that tendency is to to do better without regret, something like that, right? That impulse is what is coming out of the spirit self. And then the life spirit is that which is intention. And so if you put those three together, you've got the decision making process informing, because it's coming out of the spiritual world out of which you came to live out your destiny out in this life. It moves into your intention, which is related to forming your motive for doing something, which is then related to the process of doing better, because that's part of the generalized picture of coming into this life in order to fulfill karmic destiny. And so that is a picture of how we make decisions. And there has to be a level of trust in that those ontological realms out of which we are making those decisions. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. You helped me to remember one of the thought processes that was going on whilst I was listening to this particular bit. And I was thinking about people who survive cancer. There's a lot of literature in this field, and nobody is going to choose to have cancer. You have to be sort of like, it's verging on mad to want to choose cancer. But then again, when you start looking at the research for people that have survived cancer, very often they will use phrases similar to, "I am so glad I had it. I have changed as a person. I've reevaluated my life. My life is more meaningful now." And I think this puts it into a really, linking it to your perspectives, to what you were describing there, Jeff, that there are also wiser impulses. We would argue that that's not happened by chance, that cancer, that is a result of a illness has a function in transformation in anthroposophy. And so if so our own self-transformation is ultimately why we live life here, to grow as spiritual beings, and going through cancer and can contribute to that process, then we begin to get a feel for how these far deeper spiritual impulses push their way into our life, and our reasoning, our superficial thinking say, no, get away from me. And it sounds ridiculous when I say it like that, because of course you don't want it. But when the net result is you actually feel like your life has improved through going through that process, the deeper wisdom that brought that illness to you, or that you attracted that illness to yourself, has to be completely reevaluated. So, and I think this is one of the problems I have with appealing too much to reason. What reason? It's like superficial materialistic reasoning, or if you're talking about karmic reasoning, then you can get me on board. But I feel often this is a too shallow a level that I can feel comfortable taking part in those areas of conversation, because my mind is always thinking of examples of where reason, normal reasoning, just doesn't cut it. So thanks for reminding me of that, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what you were first talking about, Angus, when you brought up this clip and this idea of kind of optimization and the tendency to make decisions about what is the most optimal. And that is it's not my tendency, but it's a tendency I observe in a lot of people. And I think about, I do struggle with this gap that exists between the way I experience the meaning of my life and a lot of people that I know and love and respect that do take on this game theory perspective. And while I was listening to you speak, I was thinking about perhaps the reason for that is a different understanding of consciousness. And because when you suffer, no, how am I going to start this? When you're deciding what to do, are you deciding from the idea that you want to remain the same and that you now will exist in the future in the same way? Or are you deciding to change? And I think if you are deciding to stay the same, that's when you're optimizing all the time, because you don't want to suffer and you don't want to have pain and you don't want to make mistakes. But that means that you're not changing, that your decisions in the future come feeding you right now in the present moment. And that's why you would never choose to have cancer. But if you have if I'm not sure how to put this, but I feel like I'm seeing it from the other way, from a future self, from the eternal consciousness, which is my true self, not my physical body and not this particular life, because I can believe in reincarnation. That I can see. I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be happy about the fact that horrible things are going to happen in my life and I have to learn from them. But I have less fear and I have less need to control and optimize, because I know that that's serving something that I don't understand yet, but I have trust in that. And I think that's part of the trust in when you go into when you enlist in the army, and you have a commitment to the fact that I trust myself to make decisions that I think are ethical in unpredictable situations. It's not the same as I trust that I won't be changed. You know, there's a real difference. And I really liked, I think there was a video, I think it was in the John Beck video, and he talked about his mother who has a horrible, paralyzing, painful disease, and she's dying of it. But because he has the anthroposophical perspective, he sees her suffering as a triumph of will that he has not come close to in his own life. And he knows that that triumph of will has shaped her individuality so importantly, and is a gift to that individuality, that suffering that she had to endure. And yeah, I understand that I understand why people get freaked out by this kind of way of speaking, because you can shift it a little bit and suddenly you sound like you're saying, well, you know, you should be happy that you have cancer, which is not at all what I'm saying.
No.
But I'm able to have two perspectives at once, I suppose. I'm able to honor the fact that I fear pain and I want to have a good life, and those are good things. And I can also honor the fact that the pain and the confusion and the troubles that I face are transforming me. I don't know. I can have both of those because I have consciousness as who I am, not my body. Maybe?
You're silent, Jeff.
Yes. And the more you have transformed yourself in the sense of becoming more free, then your decisions will be you will be informed. You're not the same person every time you face a decision. You're not major life decisions. You yourself are in a state of self-transformation by being a human being, by virtue of being a human being. I'd also like to take this just one step back here and meet this picture also with the idea of child development. And so I think that these guys would do well if they would differentiate between child development and adult human development. I see the way in which Zak's bringing of the Piagetian picture, not exclusive to Piaget, but Ken Wilber and Mark James Baldwin and all of these other folks. These embedded developmental processes are a lifelong process, potentially, in Zak's point of view, right? But child development is fundamentally different. And I don't want to necessarily go into that, except in relationship to this point. I hope it'll come back. But so in the anthroposophical perspective of human development and transformation, we are born into an inherited body, and that body is a model, and it's a model in those first 7 years or so before dentition, the change of milk teeth into adult teeth, the hardening. As emblematic, say, there's that window, but basically the first several years is the child overcoming the hereditary body through using it as a model, right? And so if that doesn't happen, this reminds me of the stages that if you skip crawling, for example, you're missing a very important, the child is missing a very important step in the developmental stages. But what I really want to say here is that childhood illnesses, as seen from this perspective, are extraordinarily important in the child's ability to overcome the hereditary body as a model. And those two things have to go together. It's a model that needs to be overcome. But if we use antibiotics and we use fever, symptom suppression, and the child doesn't struggle in relationship to the physical body, to incarnating into the physical body as a three higher member being is destined to do in some way, shape, or form, then to some extent children are being forced to live inside the model because they never overcome it. So this is exactly why, in my opinion, in a different dimension, why psychology is so screwed up and why we can't get a developmental model, because we are living inside the simulation. We're living inside the model that we never overcame, and then we're raising children like that.
Yeah.
Angus.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Thanks for that, Jeff. I'm gonna go actually back to where Kate was and try and build on that a little bit, because I think, and it's related to what you're talking about, Jeff. The first thought I was thinking about is like there's a trust in life, and I know Zak talks about this at the end, so we won't talk about it too much. But Kate, you brought up the concept of reincarnation and karma, and Stein himself says that's why he came, to bring clarity into that concept. But if we think about it, all three of us are convinced that there is an eternal part of us that will return. And one of the reasons, what does this have to do with transformation? It means that if I experience myself as an eternal being, and it's like that life puts difficult situations, it's like in front of me, I see them there to strengthen me. They are that which help me to grow. So rather than being crushed by an experience, I'm not saying I will never be crushed by experience, but it's like my fundamental attitude to anything difficult that crosses my path is, how am I going to overcome this? How am I going to grow through this experience? And this comes out of this firm belief that I am something eternal and something that will return. And it's difficult to describe to somebody who can't accept that idea as a truth, how transformative it works on you as an individual. When they say the goal of this is a metapsychology, well, psychology is about the soul, and if you where's the spirit here, boys? I mean, where's the eternal part? And you were talking about the spirit self and Atman, these higher spiritual beings which are part of this important decision-making process, this transformation process. I would argue that until you really begin to come to grips with this term, what spirit means, and that's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's something that's like you slowly grow into, and it grows within you. But then transformation takes on a radically different perspective. You understand why you want to transform, why you need to transform, and even what will happen possibly if you don't succeed this time. That what you're doing is you're preparing yourself for next time you're here, that you'll work with whatever it is that you need to grow through. And it obviously it's far bigger than that, but I think mentioning at this stage, Kate, reincarnation and karma, and Jeff, spirit, the Atman, these spiritual aspects, these eternal aspects to ourselves, is actually really key to the transformation process.
Yeah. Yes. But I have a problem with this whole thing, because I understand why someone like Vervaeke thinks that this is really problematic, because I have a faith, and I'm convinced in reincarnation, and it helps me solve a lot of my problems about how to live. The idea of it, but it's a proposition that I have to accept first, and it isn't in. He would say, well, what's the difference between the idea that talking about reincarnation and thinking about becoming a vampire? To me, there's a total difference, but I can see from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference? Both of those are imagined, and yes, they are. And so I'm really interested in learning why I and you we're predisposed to accept these things. And we came to anthroposophy, and it made sense to us, and it gave us a framework that we think, yeah, we can work with this. And why other people it doesn't. Very interested why that happens. And I'm sure that there's a way that we can explain it in our own framework. We can talk about karma, but it doesn't meet the other person where they are. I want to be able to meet someone who, I don't understand. Game theory doesn't make sense to me, but it clearly makes sense to other people. And when they explain it to me, they use kind of game theory frameworks of explaining it. And for example, my hesitancy to optimize my life shows that I am in a weak, slave-like mentality, and I'm just letting myself be played instead of play, right? That's how they explain it. So, no, that's not true. That's not what I think. But it's similar when we say your hesitancy to anthroposophy is possibly a karmic hesitancy. It's probably written in your soul, and to them, they're like, well, fuck you. That's you're just using your own frame to explain away what I don't think is true. So I'm not saying I have the answer at all, but I have this really strong need to understand people where they're at, and understand why this instrumentalization of the person, because I have a feeling that it's a reflection of what we're doing. It's a mirror image, and so both have truth, and we can't just keep saying, well, just come into the mirror, just step into the mirror. It doesn't work. There has to. What is the key to the transformation to accepting different perspectives, and accepting that we're not just using religious, fanciful, artistic language. We're accepting something on a. Well, they come to this problem that psychology is really just religion, and that a psychologist is a lay priest, and that's a problem for them. But it's not a problem for me, because the religion isn't a problem for me. I think it's an important. So, what can we do?
I mean, they are right at the beginning. They talk about a metapsychology that is true to reality. If the spirit is true, it will be reflected in reality. Having said that, even if we think we found enough evidence in our own lives to be convinced that it's true, these people quite clearly need a different type of evidence or that perhaps they haven't even looked. That could be also part of the problem as well.
I don't think it's evidence. I don't think it's evidence. I think it's something innate. That's what I'm trying to say. There's like I'm not. Grammar isn't proven to me through evidence. You know, it's
Okay.
not. It's something that I've grasped because I wanted to grasp it. So what is that? You know, I don't think that I can give someone who doesn't want to grasp this lecture a lot of lectures.
I've like dabbled in lots of fields because I've been also looking for what I would actually call evidence, or something that is difficult for natural science to explain, but which once you start taking on board concepts. So first of all, this is all born. First of all, the concepts are born in you. And then you recognize the evidence in the real world in the percepts. Yeah, because percepts are otherwise they're nothings. So if you haven't got a concept of spirit, you're never ever going to find it. As you were saying, you have to like have it as a proposition first, play with it, and then start looking at it. But what happens is once you start, let's just select, say, this reincarnation and karma particular question. So if you don't believe in it, you'll reject all of the evidence out there from people who give testimonies, and there are lots of them on YouTube, amongst other places, and there are researchers that look into this. That it's like they have these things that are very difficult to explain using a materialistic worldview of what's going on. Basically, they have to say it's a load of rubbish or it's chance. That's their explanation. It's chance. Okay, or if you look at NDE experiences, what's going on here? So if you don't have the concept of a spirit, something that lives beyond the body, then you have to reject all of that area of science as well. And if you look into the field of the placebo and nocebo effect, you have to invent a load of reasons, whereas actually you've got this nice simple idea that our spirit is something beyond the body, which actually shapes the body. So we're in slight disagreement there, Kate. I do think there's evidence, but if you don't have a concept for it, you will never see that evidence. You will never be convinced by that evidence. And this is where Steiner's epistemology is like really key, isn't it?
Yeah, and I wonder if we could talk about, I mean, this has just occurred to me now, so I don't have any. This is for a future day, but things in our life, not in our reincarnated life, not in our karma, but in our actual life, biographical moments that built the bed that could accept the seed to allow the concept to actually grow into something that we accept, you know, but because we're talking about the development of someone and the development of their consciousness and the points at which they transform. And so I'm sure that you could look to biographical moments in a person's life that predisposed them, well, that prepared a good bed, you know, and we don't need to point to something that we can't actually see. This is interesting because we're both talking about evidence, but we think about it in a very different way. Like, I totally get what you mean, but it doesn't light me up. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? And I know that it's true, but it just doesn't. And now I'm thinking, no, yeah, we're bringing two sides of evidence to the table, and that's really nice. Yeah. Thank you.
There's two different motives for evidence, right? Or there are maybe many motives, but I hear two different motives. One motive is to prove to somebody else that this thing exists, or to prove to oneself that it exists, and the other is, isn't it amazing? isn't it amazing how it elegantly plays out in every dimension? And in the dimension of the sense perception is the most obvious dimension. It's amazing that brain physiology works the way you can locate spiritual concepts within the way in which we manifest physically, like that, something like that. The other thing about evidence is that I don't need evidence, but I need things to be plausible, right? And so the field of what I will consider plausible has considerably expanded. And I want to be fair to these guys, because they are not saying that they have to have evidence. What they're saying is we have to be able to establish something that is of the kind of spiritual science. So we have to establish an epistemologically sound methodology for discovering these ontological dimensions beyond what it is that we see, which is why they bring religion in, because the only, what Zak says that when he quotes Habermas, which is that about the untapped semantic potential of religious language, that we need religious language to explain the things that we are standing at the gates of the mystery of, in order to explain, in order to feel our way more and more deeply into the mystery, to become more and more to expand our relationship with reality. And one way we do that is through knowledge, right? It's not the only way, but it is the way in which we take up our bed and walk. It's the way in which we move into the carriage of our human frame, soul carriage, life process carriage, and physical carriage ultimately. And we've got this dead thing on our head, and we carry it around with us, right? Everything else is somewhat alive. This thing is dead, and we have to bring concepts into it that re-enliven that which arises for us, right, through the deep subconscious that's related to the life processes, which is another conversation. So they're trying to make room for this, what we're describing. They're trying to make room for spiritual science, not in order to prove, but in order to develop a infrastructure and framework for the methodology for doing so. And I think sweetly, Gregg mentions this right around this time in the video, when he says, when he's asking for sort of the infrastructures and domains of what human development is. What are we working on? That sort of thing. So, and that's adult human development that he's talking about at that point. They don't have a complex enough relationship with a 100 years of scientific research done by Waldorf teachers around the world on the deep complexity of what child development is, and the way in which that body of knowledge has been collegially worked together in order to evolve a better understanding of the children now, and the children that they're seeing that are being transformed by our society, transformed by our society, and the needs of the children are changing. And Waldorf is changing along with that, because the ontological content, the ground, is changing right underneath our children's feet.
Seeing as you mentioned it, Jeff, I'll actually play that bit, because that was one of the bits that we had lined up that you were talking about with Jeff there.
I keep coming back to, just because of my own development and anchoring, is what kinds of transformations shall we seek, and how shall we seek them, and when? What does it mean in relationship to cultivate proper transformation, to do what? To higher levels of functioning. And what does that mean? I want to wonder whether or not we could develop a picture of the human condition that's grounded in science and advanced ethical thinking and theological reflection, that would afford us capacities to reflect on that with wisdom and sophistication collectively. And so to me, the issue is, well, what is this? How does it happen? We problematize it in a particular way, get a particular angle on that. And then the issue is, well, yes. And then what are the lines of development, the processes of transformation that might undergird this? And then what are the collective systems that would afford that kind of unfolding in a way that would be wise, ethical, toward the good, etc. And that to me is essentially vacant in relation.
Oh, that's so good. Thank you for bringing that. So, one thing that's clear to me is that without developing children, then the remedial work it will take to develop as an adult could be impossible, right? So, first of all, step one is develop children, and then that means educating their will and their feeling life through the first 14 years, so that when the ability to take the reins of their body and their soul life, they can do so with greater freedom, greater creativity, so that they can contribute to the second part, the cultural evolution part that Zak was talking about. That's our ecological medium. It's the threefold nature of the social question. It's the threefold organism. If you want to afford a culture that provides for adult development in the way that they're talking about, then the society itself has to meet the adult in the most in a way that is in harmony with what it is to be a human being, and that is a threefold picture, right?
Yeah, that's excellent. I don't have anything to add. It's just exactly what I wrote in my notes.
When I came across this bit, it's a framework for transformation that was the phrase that immediately sent my mind to biography work, which is linked to the phases, the very specific ideas about what subjects and when to look at in Waldorf education. But one of the things that biography work does is that takes us into the adult realm as well, because my opinion, I would perhaps, if we end up in conversation with Zak at some stage in the future, I might be, they can educate me, but my understanding is development stops at 21. Oh yeah, no. So people do have midlife crises, but I mean that's it. We stop developing when we're 21, and when you take the reality of like the three soul bodies and the three spirit bodies into consideration, and house like through all the way through to approximately 63 years old, we're developing different aspects of our body, soul, spirit, nature. Then also this transformation question is happening within a framework which from our perspective is to the highest degree is being true to reality. That is what is going on. That is what's going on to all levels of society.
Yeah, so they don't mention Rudolf Steiner. Zak Stein has done a significant study of Rudolf Steiner, so I know that this is part of. You can hear it in the background. He's having the conversation that he's having with the people that he's having. I'm not saying he's an anthroposophist or that he desires to develop his metapsychology out of it, but it is certainly informative. But they do talk about Sri Aurobindo, and it's so none of these people think that adult transformation is not possible. None of them. They talk about psychedelics and stage consciousness, and Zak is a scholar of Aurobindo, so he could give you the way in which Aurobindo's, if he studied Steiner's developmental model, he will, or not developmental reality. He could show you the way, and I've listened to I've read a little bit out of Robert McDermott, who is also an Aurobindo scholar, that the ideas of the dimensional realities above our normal consciousness are very, very, very similar, and that comes out of a tradition of 2,500 years of interior research, and that's what they call it, right? I don't like the word interior necessarily, and it's necessary to speak about that which is interior when one goes into meditation. It's a asocial mode. So you are in a certain frame that is interior. But in any case, this is why they're convening, is in order to develop the language, and as we go forward, we'll be able to bring more and more, I believe, of the anthroposophical language that deals with the religious, the artistic, and the self-reflective knowing that it is in epistemology. What I want to say to Gregg is, go read Philosophy of Freedom, man, because it has the ground out of which that infrastructure and domain you're looking for is built.
Because the authority is in us if we are honest and truthful. That's what I wrote, and if we are honest and truthful, we find the threefoldness, and that authority lies with us. And it's so terrifying to not trust yourself, but so many people don't.
Yeah, for sure. We institutionalized self-distrust.
We did.
And I really feel these guys are working, trying to do something here. And I have very much more respect after this conversation for Gregg. Like what he brings here is very important to the three of them, and I love their rigor, and I love their willingness to challenge their own limitations.
And that also dovetails with what Kate was saying earlier. So it's how do these people are clearly looking for something else. We believe we have that something, but you still got this huge language gap, conceptual gap, and how do we find a way of talking together so that we don't come across as crackpots or like dreamy. It's like romantics. John doesn't like the romantics. There's a feel of romanticism there. How do we convey that clarity, that certainty that we think we have found in this? It's a huge challenge.
Well, that's what we're doing. So that's why we're doing it. So what's next, Angus?
I think you're going to pick up on Gregg's question at 51:14. So I'll just play that one there for you. So we skipped over the imaginal and the liminal, but I think we'll just play with skipping over it now.
Can I just comment on the imaginal liminal, because I thought that was a key moment, because then it's when John said that's spirit, right? When it was sort of a discovery in a way that the imaginal is spirit, and it's not, but he's close, right? It's the consciousness soul that is that he's talking about. He's talking about a consciousness soul experience from a spiritual perspective, because he's using thinking to make it come alive. But I know from other videos that John doesn't accept the evolution of consciousness, and it's based on the grounding in only a materialistic description of what the evolution of consciousness is. So if he read chapter 12 of Philosophy of Freedom, it could break something free for him, I think. But that people are now in mainstream, and these guys are not far from mainstream, but they're within the empirical rational debate. At least John is. They are, but they are dealing with a lot of concepts that are super borderline to anthroposophy in relationship to what the imagination is, in the role it plays. So,
okay, I'm glad you kept me honest there. So I'm actually going to go back to that now, seeing as you brought it up there, Jeff, because there was a lot of interesting stuff going on around this.
Yes, please.
Area.
Yeah, awesome.
There's quite a bit of talk about aspiration and the importance of aspiration, and this comes up in chapter 13 of the Philosophy of Freedom. It's not called aspiration there, it's called striving, and what striving is in the context of human development, of human transformation, and that there is actually a joy in battling against something. It's Steiner uses this phrase, doesn't he, in there, where he says, like, if I believe sincerely in something, if I've set myself a goal, if I'm striving towards something, it's not just the attainment of that is important, because he says, I can get to the end of the phase, or I can get to the end of my life and say, well, I never succeeded. But if I can say to myself, but I did the best I could, then I can still be happy. So, and I think this striving as part of this, and where striving comes from, this internal motivation becomes a huge aspect in this transformation question, because it's us, as we have to generate what it is that we're wanting to strive towards. And that was chapter 13, the philosophy of freedom. And then linking to what John was saying about the imaginal and play, when he was talking about the imaginal, I was reading Purpose, which is chapter 12. It's this unique humane capacity that we have, that is literally to map out something that's going to happen in the future. And that this is a fundamental aspect of what we are as human beings, to set goals for ourselves, to want to change, to want to transform. And that still leaves open this question, okay, in what direction do we want to transform? And I think, I'll just leave that. So this video between the 38 minute and the 42 minute mark, it's got philosophy of freedom chapter 12 and 13 written all over it, large. And this is, I think I mentioned, didn't I, at the beginning of this video, it took me about 40 minutes to get into it. This is where I got in, because I realized, now we're there, guys. We're talking about the real things that matters, those things that come out of ourselves, those things that drive transformation. So
you can put all that together. This is great because chapter 12 and moral imagination is about having a thinking about what they do, the ought is distinction. And I'm always bothered by, not always bothered. Last time we recorded, I used the ought it, and that was with Matt, actually, Matt's group, ought it. And that's a better description, because we're not describing what is when we're talking about this dichotomy. We're talking about itness. We've objectified the world. That's the reality. That's the thing in itself. And then we have, on the other side of that, we have a moral impulse. And if we only have an isness, exactly. The moral ground of being is where moral imagination draws its unification of a perceptual and conceptual process in order to set up an ideal. And that's an ideal that is drawn from reality, from the ground of reality, and the striving, which is what Steiner refers to in Foundations of Human Experience as the wish to do better, as a will impulse. And what that flowers into is imagination with a capital I in the spirit self, which is a domain just above the consciousness soul that John's talking about, which is the imaginal, which is not fantasy, right? But it's also not imagination that's drawing from an ontological realm of its own, right? And then we can talk about inspiration in relationship to the next level up, and why inspiration is almost a musical sense of the intonation of reality, and how that intonation then is available for the imagined to be more and more accurate, and more something you're participating in. And then decision is, again, going back to the spirit man, the highest form of of human consciousness that remains human, which is the intuition, which is what decision making is. So if your intuition is flowing in a flow state, as John might say, with inspiration, that's insight, and imagination, which is the life processes revealing themselves to us as reality, because we have it in us as the 7 life processes, then we are metabolizing the reality of the world around us, right? And then our forms are going to reflect that, like the social threefolding, right? I just love that. It's there, and John's touching upon it. Zach also, and there you go, Greg. That's what you work with your clients.
I'm going to have to go, I'm afraid.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I have a busy day ahead.
going to church.
Yes, I'm going to church. I'm actually getting confirmed today.
Oh, you were already confirmed in our book.
Yeah, thank you. Me too.
Thanks for
well,
joining
thank
us,
you so
Kate.
much. This has been really good. And
Yeah.
we're grateful that I have to leave, but
Just the beginning. We're just building
yeah, it's just
something
the beginning.
here.
Next
Yeah.
time, yeah.
All right.
I'm really excited. Okay. Well,
Have
good
a
luck
great-
with all your talking. Thank you.
Have a great confirmation. I don't know what the hell that is, but I'm sure it'll be transformative.
I'm sure it will be too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Love to you.
Thank you. Love to you too. And love to you, Angus.
Love to you. Bye.
All right.
Yeah, I was just coming back to John and this liminal space, and he talks about the huge value to kids, and he's absolutely he's bang on there, and he links this into this idea of purpose, which I was talking about. So one of the questions they're going to have to tackle, I think, in as a future, because unlike you, I haven't seen the rest of the videos, is so what does adult play begin to look like? And then and that's where anthroposophy is also crystal clear about what it is. It's finding these higher ideals to align yourself with. It's a recognition of the Logos working within you, the Christ that is in the etheric, that is waiting to be beholden or beheld by transformed thinking, by sensory thinking, by etheric thinking, and so much more. One of the things I was struck by here, so there was this focus on young people and play, but you and I, or you were possibly thinking of the same thing. And when Nietzsche was talking about like the death of God, he hit the nail on the head there. That it's like society has been built around this structure of a common goal of like us working towards God. Society lost that common goal, and it's got nothing to replace it. So that transformative, what was working as a transformative force, so like through society, gets lost in society, or in a large part of society. And where is it going to come back? And that's where we also believe that anthroposophy has some good suggestions on where that might be, where a common spiritual striving might be found. But
Yeah.
And Zak, I also think he emphasized somewhere close to this mark the point about with Buddhism and this as the soul. It's the soul that's the source of transformation, which I thought was also interesting, because I felt he was like strongly in sympathy with, or I was in sympathy with him from that perspective. It's coming from within. This has to come from within. That doesn't mean it can't be supported or afforded by structures in society. But if it doesn't come from within, then then it becomes problematic.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And we need the structures in society that help cultivate it.
Yeah.
And don't stunt it, and don't fool people, and don't, Zach's work on propaganda is extraordinary in this respect. As somebody who understands what it is at stake, which is the soul, because the soul is going to transform. There's no way around it. Transformation is part of reality, and human beings are self-transforming beings, and that transformation can be awful, or it can be follow developmental laws, and so the one thing I will take issue with is as relates to John is that childhood imaginative play is not aspirational. Serious play of adults is aspirational.
Yeah.
Right. It's to become like we talked about before. It is to self-transform, and for adults, it's art that is the main medium for serious play, and that includes, as Steiner describes, being an artist in concepts. So discovering through the universal process of thinking. And obviously, there's one thing that none of the three have as in their wheelhouse that I can see, is that thinking itself is the ground of being, as and that we as human beings are manifest that in the particular way that human beings do. Right. There's also the echo or shadow of thinking that happens within the death processes that go to die in the central nervous system, or the nervous system as a whole. So there's that. But there's where the confusion of adult development and child development lies is part of the problem that they're genuinely struggling with, that they don't know that they're struggling with, I think. And I'm not sure. I think Zach has some idea of child development, but he doesn't bring it out as relates to the complexity of, as I referred to before, of the thousands and thousands of scientists who've been working on it for 100 years. They talk about the interior sciences. They're working with children, and part of the interiority of children is their environment.
Yeah.
Because there's not an inner and outer with children. Yeah. Steiner talks about in 3 lectures back to back that deal with the life processes. Steiner talks about the cosmological evolutionary phase of the moon phase of Earth evolution, where human beings only had, instead of 12 senses, had 7 senses. That's pretty much just for me and you to understand at this point, because it doesn't really matter. But they didn't. But what they were was, in relationship to their environment, their form was determined by the environment that they would live in. So if they experienced the color blue in the sky, let's just say, then they expanded to the full limit of that thing. So they weren't confined to a hard physical body, right? If they even had a physical body at all. Okay, so that could seem fanciful, right? But if you apply it to children, then you're going to be pretty damn accurate, because the internal life of children is the adults around them for the most part. They don't have an executive function. I'm the executive function. They don't have at a certain age, from 0 to 7, they don't have an incarnated soul body. I'm their soul body. The parents and the school around them. So I don't think you can. That these are very important distinctions to make when we're talking about child development, and I think we'll be hammering this for the next 5 videos, because it's very important, and it sets up the possibility for adult development later in a way at least is not lost. Something's not lost, and probably in ways that are extraordinarily beneficial if we'll try it as a society.
I think I'm going to repeat what you said, that the ground of being, or the ground of knowledge of being, is in thinking, and it can't be emphasized enough how important this is. Gregg talks about it. So that this what is the relation between ontology and epistemology? Yeah, so ontology is a theory of being, but if we don't know what thinking is, it's our true relationship to thinking, the activity, the ground, as you say it, the ground of our being, then we're not going to have our feet on a solid ground on which it's like true ontological facts of being can actually be established. And I thought your description there of slightly adults around being the inner life of the child whilst it's still at home, especially in the early years, is a wonderful way of making sense of we see it. So like in society, the real impact of children growing up in different types of environments, emotional environments. And so that whole dynamic viewed through the lens you just presented becomes, wow, yeah, that's a powerful model there, isn't it? The outside world, the emotional atmosphere, the intellectual atmosphere in the house has a huge impact on the bodies that child is creating, which it will then carry on through life. And there was another thought that that's disappeared already. So I'll if it comes back, I'll say it. But I think you said a lot. You said a lot of interesting, important things there, Jeff.
Yeah, well, it also feeds into the question that Greg keeps bringing in a way. How do I practice to help people? What's the domains and dimensions that we're dealing with? And it's, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's there in anthroposophy. It's there, and it's there as an ontological framework. This is the way we can communicate, right? And it's there not as passively normative, right? Or the normative is important, but it is what is morally imaginative that is the way to get a hold of reality, right? And so that happens through understanding the domain in which you're operating. And so if there's a life body, and there's an astral body or a soul body or whatever you might want to call it, and if there is the unique self that is in concert with other unique selves, then we have three domains here. We have the realm of imagination, which has its own domain in the etheric. You have the domain of inspiration as a higher level of consciousness that perceives the domain of the astral world or the soul world, and then you have intuition as a level of consciousness that perceives in the realm of the highest world, of the I-ness world, of the unicity and the multiplicity, of oneness and separateness at the same time. That's the consciousness, and that those together are what I would refer to as the Christ consciousness. And we can talk about it in ontological terms. It's at the very least, John, I would say, and Greg, and probably Zach, but I don't know. It's at least plausible, right? This is at least plausible, and we have 100 years of education that have borne the fruit of this as something more than theory, as actuated in children's lives and in communities, and is proliferating in early child development in China, for example. So it's the thing that changes the world.
I'm just looking at the time. Should we? We've been going 1:50. Should we skip to the bit where we're talking about paradigm shift, Zach's power of the word, and semiotic function, and bring that into play as the last bit. So,
Actually, that my department, although I'm trying to change it, my department, this is the psychology department of the University of Toronto. It is one of the great psychology departments. I'm biased, but there's objective evidence to support that, right?
I'll support that.
Slide. One is that religion has been aware of transformation and about transformation and build its rituals around those key nodal points in human life that involve transformation, like birth and death and adolescence and marriage and childbirth and all of those are all places where there are religious rituals. So there's that stack that really.
Sorry, I picked the wrong bits. Sorry about this. This is the bit where John finishes really well, and I thought we could finish it there. What Zach was saying was important, but it's getting late here.
Of the unfolding wave of behavior, and then a humanistic, wisdom-based, religio-based.
Not the reverse of your proposal. What I mean is, we've also inherited within the Cartesian framework an attitude towards transformation within epistemology. What I mean by this is that before, like if you look before sort of Occam, right? There was this proposal that there are many truths that will not be disclosed to you unless you go through significant transformation. So that transformation had a proper epistemological role. There were dimensions of reality, truths that could not be realized unless you realized yourself, unless you went through transformation. And then what you get with Occam and then developed very explicitly in Descartes is no, you don't need to go through transformation. All you need is an inferential method. This is the right, you get the emergence of method that gives us universal access. And so I also want, like we've been talking about.
Okay, so there's some really interesting stuff there, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, we're talking about the meaning crisis and why there is a meaning crisis, right? And but we can't go back, as you were mentioning, you were intimating earlier. Can't go back to religion, like the religion that was exoterically put in place in order to keep people in check in some way and people to self-check in some way. We're in a time between worlds, as Zach says, and it's the Cartesian approach that John describes is a stubborn, self-replicating monster. It's a hydra, right?
It's a level of transformation. It is a transformation from medieval thinking, but further transformations have happened. I think what John Harris says is so essential to this whole conversation from our perspective. He says transformation determines epistemology, i.e. our knowledge of our understanding of the world. And this is what spiritual science brings to the table. It is an evolution, as like in epistemology, because you transform, and when you work with these concepts and see how they map to things that are happening in the world, then even it's like problematic, really tricky ideas to get your head around, like the evolution of consciousness, becomes something that you begin to understand, and you actually begin to see how history is a revelation of those three words, an evolution of consciousness, just like Descartes was an evolution in consciousness from previous ways of thinking. The Greeks were an evolution of consciousness from the Egyptian way of thinking, and there are loads of stages in between. You know, when we did the riddles of philosophy, it's like we mapped out that process in like quite a detailed structure, quite a detailed fashion there. So I think John is describing his way out there perfectly. We are 100% in total agreement. The difference being that we think we actually might have done some of that transformation for ourselves. Yeah,
well, and we have something to offer right there at that point, because the move from say, pre-modernity into this propositional logic ruled way of
Inferential thinking.
inferential thinking, probability and predictability, all of that we've talked about before, is that it was a move into the intellectual soul. So what was before that? Well, it was the sentient soul. And if a transformation true to reality will reveal the Steiner's phenomenology of the soul. So we've got epistemology on one side. We've got the realms of perception that we perceive in as the ontology, and then we have the phenomenology that illustrates the way in which these developments happen. So they don't just happen like a step up, like we don't just go from consciousness soul and pop out into a spirit self and then up the levels I was describing. We also are incarnating down into these souls. We're in a mastery of these souls by going up. So and up down, these are metaphorical terms or representative terms. But so if religion was born in a time of the sentient soul, because people weren't separate from the nature of existence, including their own nature. Their soul was connected to the body in which they were moving around in, and the body of reality as a whole. And then what we see is that then there was a time between worlds, and the intellectual soul popped in. What we're trying to do now is freeze ourselves in the intellectual soul. But then we moved into the consciousness soul age, marked by the novel, in other words, the revelation of self-consciousness increased to the degree that this reflective consciousness that John talks about, that is spiritual, is we move into this age where then we have psychology itself. No wonder psychology didn't succeed. We're trying to hang it in a previous soul development, right? We need to have moved into the consciousness soul so that we can go beyond the consciousness soul. But that's where we are right now. We're not in this the age of the spirit self yet. We're not at the age where the spiritual world is again transparent to us because it's all around us, right? And what I love about what Zak says is that we are in the next video, he says we are, maybe it was this one, I'm not sure, but we are everything the world has ever been, and every time the world has ever been is still within us. Because but he contradicts that in another place, because he talks about pre-human realities that one can't question, and one shouldn't question because they're value structures. But in any case, he says this beautiful thing, which is that we are everywhere, and we are all that we've ever been. So I personally know people who are oriented toward anthroposophy who would like to just sort of say that we're in a consciousness soul age and not recognize that we still have an intellectual soul. So we can read Philosophy of Freedom, right? And we still have a sentient soul, which means that we don't need medical intervention to tell us how to be healthy.
I was thinking of another. If we just this evolution of consciousness, sticking with that as well. So, but when at the time of Descartes, probability hadn't even been invented. So it's the gospel of the modern age, the gospel of academia. Probability that hadn't even been created. That's an invention. I think this is when I was very interested in finance. I read it's like a lot of historical works about this. I think it was about the 1750s that people started theorizing around this. So this is something that's just over 200 years old. That is an evolution of consciousness, being able to think in probabilistic terms, and I think it's useful to see that, to encourage. I mean, I'm not I'm not wanting to come across as I know it all. I know I don't know it all. But one thing I do feel sure about is that I hear sincere seeker in John when he says something like this. A transformation is like determines epistemology. Perhaps look outside. Perhaps look outside the field, and you might actually find some people have already transformed into what is going to be in 100 or 200 years' time. De rigor it's going to be sort of the way people think, or sort of the models they're using to understand the world. Not everybody, of course, but if they want a metapsychology that's true to reality, that's based in reality, that is what we think we have here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, that comes full circle right there. Yeah, beautiful. Well said.
Shall I press?
Yes, sir.